Find that same piece of paper.
我找到一张纸。
The one that you wrote that question on earlier today about the two aspects of holiness.
据说圣洁有两方面。
If you have any room beneath that, write this question.
那么，如果您下面还有地方你就写这个问题，另外一个问题。
The question is, what was one of the big questions at the 1895 Niagara Bible Conference?
1895, right?
1895 Bible Conference.
Okay.
From page
这个在20页讲到这个在1895年的时候有这个Niagara 的这个会议当中上人争论的是比较大的那个问题是什么？
This is from page 28.
就是28页。
Big problem, right?
Yes.
A conflict.
That's our conflict, yes.
这个他们所争论的是什么？
Okay, there's our 5 minutes. So, so who would like to tell me what answer that they have for this question?
的答案，谁要告诉他？
Or should I just call on somebody?
Yeah, I think so. It's going to take forever.
Lena, did you ever find something?
The question is about the rapture, whether it will come before or after the tribulation period.
Yes, that's right.
是讲到那个被提的事情是那个是在前被提或是在后。
Is that what everyone else?
是不是大家的答案是这样？
Well, this today I will stand. We'll start with the Bible verse. This class, Joshua 1:8.
第1章第8节。
This book of the law shall not depart. I'll wait till you find it. Joshua 1:8. This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success.
约书亚记1章8节，这律法书不可离开你的口，总要昼夜思想，好使你谨守遵行这书上所写的一切话，如此你的道路就可以亨通，凡事顺利。
Thank you, Joseph. This is the verse that Joshua. God's telling Joshua the fact of the importance of the book of the law.
上帝告诉耶稣亚，这个很重要，就是这个律法书。
And the books of the Bible that Joshua had available to him
在当时候给他的这个律法书
were the first 5 books of Moses.
那是摩西的5经，那头2本。
See why? What are the first 5 books of Moses?
这个摩西5经是哪5本
？Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers,
Deuteronomy.
Just in that Dutch.
就是这5本书创世纪、出埃及记、民数记、利未记、民数记跟申命记。
Those are the first 5 books, and those are the books that were being attacked by modern day critics.
据说这5本书呢，就是现代的那个神学呢，他们在攻击的这部分。
That is the modern day critics of 100 years ago.
据说100年前的这些现代派的人。
And they're being attacked by modern-day critics in our time period as well.
甚至在我们这个时代也是在攻击这两本书。
And as we notice on page 127 of the book,
在我们这本书的127页，
the Presbyterians were noted for education.
这个长老会呢，他们很出名的，据说他们很强调的就是要这些人受训练、有知识的、有学。
You know, they had strict qualifications for their pastors.
他们对这些牧者的要求很高、很严格。
And particularly at this time period in history, they were falling behind the other denominations.
因为他们还比其他的宗派比较差劲。
There is nothing wrong with having a standard for education.
据说关于这个教育方面的程度呢，这样的要求不是说不好的。
But in some aspects, the Presbyterians were too intellectual.
但是这些长老会呢，好像太注重这个知识这一方面。
They weren't as evangelistic as, say, the Methodists.
他们不像那个卫理公会很注重这个传福音的事情。
Who were able to be able to get more established churches out in the frontier quicker than the Presbyterians.
他们还比那个据说卫理公会在很多地方可以设立这些教会，胜过这个长老会。
Now, when I say frontier, I'm talking about in America.
据说在美国的这个 frontier 的这些的地方。
Going back back in the 1800s.
在1800年代的时候。
The development of the Midwest and the West of the United States.
据说在美国的中西部那一方面
had not really taken place yet.
据说还没有很发展。
Perhaps you've heard of the pioneers.
据说这些开荒的人
people that left the East and traveled west.
据说他们离开了东部到西部去。
And before the day of automobile or truck, they took a covered wagon.
他们以前的那个时代呢，没有车子，就带着这个wagon 这个出去。
That's
他们的交通工具。
That was known in America as the frontier.
所以他就说是当时候这个 frontier 的这个字出来。
See, the Baptists and the Methodists, they had a lower standard of education.
这个浸信会跟那个卫理公会呢，他们也很注重这个知识这一方面。
Or perhaps
教育。
A different threshold or standard for education.
他们对这个宗教的程度呢要求很高，有标准的。
Baptist and
Methodists.
They were lower in their education.
Their standard for the pastor is lower. Yes.
就是说这个卫理公会跟什么？卫理公会、浸信会他们要求有比这个长老会低一点。
And so, when the seminaries of the Presbyterians became liberal,
当这些长老会的这些神学院比较自由派了以后
so did the seminarians.
据这些神学院
A seminarian is a student that goes to seminary.
据说学生去那个神学院。
And so, the point of bringing up their qualifications, the Presbyterians wanted their pastors to be qualified, which it's good to have certain qualifications as far as educational qualifications.
他们对他们的要求的那种的资格是比较高。
But this is the reason what gave them the problem.
但是因为这样呢，就带来了这些的问题。
Later today, we're going to be talking about a quote by I don't know who the quote's from right now, but we'll be looking at a quote about this very thing.
据说我们等一下会看到这样的情况。
It's as the seminaries go, so go the denominations.
据说这个那个神学院变质的时候，那么教会也受影响。
Now, the Presbyterians have an interesting type of denomination. They have several splinters and splits and so forth, but
据这些长老会呢，后来呢也分裂了，也分好几派。
they were segmented by the north and the south.
他们有北部跟南部。
And then those two groups divided in half.
然后在一半就也有分裂了，
and they come back together again.
然后他们再回来。
But we have, before the merger, this is going back to more current history,
据说到比较现代的历史当中，
talking about liberalism in the denominational schools.
就是说在这些学校已经有些变质，变成新派的。
Over on page 128,
128页，
we have the merger of Pittsburgh and Xenia Seminary.
据当时候呢，有 Pittsburgh 这个这个不是 Philadelphia Pennsylvania 哈， 宾州的这个 Pittsburgh 哈跟 Xenia 的这个神学院。
And so you have the United Presbyterian Church of North America.
据说有联合的那个长老会。
And we also have the Presbyterian Church in the USA.
还有那个在美国的这个长老会。
So for the Presbyterians, we have Western Seminary.
在那个长老会有这个西方的这个神学院。
And their East Coast Seminary was the Pittsburgh Xenia Seminary.
在East Coast 还有这个 Xenia 的这个神学院。
And the Presbyterians had this merger in 1958.
在1958年哈，他们联合起来，
which resulted in the United Presbyterian Church in the USA.
就变成是联合的这个长老会。
Then we had schools that were merging as well.
那么还有学校呢，他们也联合起来。
For various reasons, different Presbyterian schools were merged.
好几间那个长老会的神学院也联合了。
And so you had Pittsburgh Xenia Seminary.
你有那个 Pittsburgh 的这个跟 Xenia 的神学院联合。
And you had Presbyterian Seminary.
还有那个长老会的神学院。
That merged, that became Pittsburgh Theological Seminary.
就变成 Pittsburgh 的那个神学院。
Now, Pittsburgh Xenia Seminary began back in the 1700s, 1794.
在1794年的时候，有这个 Pittsburgh 跟 Xenia 的神学院。
And John Anderson was the first teacher.
这个第一位的那个老师呢，就是这个John Anderson。
But it actually was called Service Seminary.
他们当时候是称他们这个神学院是那个好像是服侍的那个神学院。
As we read through these different schools, their names will change, the locations will change.
据说我们一直往下去的时候，你会发现这些学校呢又改变了那个就是说地方也改了，然后名字也改了。
And sadly, their doctrine will change.
然后他们的在个教义方面呢也是更改了。
So Service Seminary, which originally started in Pittsburgh, moved to Ohio.
这个Service Seminary 这个服侍的这个神学院呢，他们从 Pittsburgh 搬到那个 Ohio 去。
Then it moved to Missouri, changed its name to Xenia Seminary. Actually, moved to Ohio, changed its name to Xenia.
他们就搬到那个别的地方去呢，Missouri 他们就变成那个 Xenia 的神学院。
Then moved northwest to Missouri.
他搬到那个西北边的时候，是那个在 Missouri 的这个地方。
Xenia Seminary, that is, moved Missouri.
就在那个 Xenia 的神学院呢，后来是在那个Missouri 的这个地方。
And then it came back to Pittsburgh.
后来再回来到那个 Pittsburgh，
Become Pittsburgh Xenia Seminary.
就变成是 Pittsburgh Xenia 的神学院。
And the first president was William Moorhead.
第一个院长呢，就是那个 William Moorhead。
And Moorhead was a sound Bible-believing Orthodox Christian.
这个Moorhead 呢是很基要派的人，那个很纯正的神学教育。
But in time, Xenia Seminary, he was the founding president, first president, but in time, it went liberal.
但是后来呢，这个神学院又变成了比较是新派的。
Now Moorhead was one of the editors of the Scofield Bible.
这个 Moorhead 呢是这个斯可夫圣经的那个其中一位编辑。
And when he was at Xenia, he was a teacher of New Testament.
他在基尼亚神学院的时候，他是教那个新约。
And he's the author of a book about the Genesis, about the book of Genesis. This is still on page 128.
他有写一本书是关于这个创世纪
entitled Studies in Mosaic Institutions.
他这本书的那个题目就是在研究这个摩西的这些的机构。
He completed this in 1896.
这个是1896年的时候。
And Moorhead is the one responsible for pioneering the Bible Conference movement.
这个 Moorhead 这个人呢，就是这个基要派的这些这个圣经的会呢的那个，其实是其中一个开创的人。
So he was involved in the idea of education with Service Seminary.
他是很强调这个神学的训练，他就开始这个 Service 那个神学院，这个服侍的神学院。
But he also had the burden for the Bible Conference movement.
他也有负担关于这个设立这些圣经的会议。
And remember yesterday, I forget in which, I guess it was in the lecture 3, class 3 yesterday. We talked about the fundamentals.
昨天差不多3点钟之后，我们在学习关于这个基要派的事情。
We discussed the Scofield Bible, the fundamentals.
我们研究的是那个斯可夫的圣经，还有这些基要派。
Fundamentals was a book that was bound. It was 12-volume set book.
昨天早上我们看到那个，据说那12本的关于这个基要派的事情。
And Moorhead wrote 2 articles in the book.
有写其中2个题目。
The first article was called "The Moral Glory of Jesus Christ: A Proof of Inspiration."
他写的第一本书呢，据说这个基督的这个的荣耀，来证明说这个他的末世。
And the second article was actually an attack upon the Jehovah's Witnesses, which was entitled "A Millennial Dawn: Counterfeit Christianity."
另外一本呢，他是在攻击这个耶和华见证人，他就讲到这个1000年的那个清晨，讲到这个基督教呢，把那个不对的那个地方。
Now, the next president of Xenia was Joseph Kyle.
另外一个据后来接续 Moorhead 的是名叫 Joseph Kyle 这个人。
And he was a theology teacher at Xenia.
他是在教那个神学的课程。
He was also the president of Xenia after Moorhead left the presidency.
他也是在当时候的那个主办人。
And he co-authored the book The Address of the Second Coming.
他跟另外一个人呢，他就来写这本书关于这个第二次主耶稣第二次再来的这些文章。
You have to remember at this time we have this conflict about eschatology, the conflict about last things.
因为我们知道他们因为这个末世论的事情而有这些的争论。
There is still discussion inside the debates about the second coming today.
好，现在还是在研究的这个末世论的事情。
But it was a bigger conflict within denominations at this time.
这个是比较是这个宗派里面他们在争论。
Today, the denominations have fragmented into their vantage point of eschatology.
这个也到现在也是在争论的，是关于这个末世论的不同的观点。
Eschatology, as you know, is the study of last things.
这个末世论是讲到末世的事情。
Now, Melvin Kyle, he was the next president of Xenia.
Xenia 的接下去的那个院长呢，就是名叫 Melvin Grove Kyle。
And he was a teacher of archaeology.
他所教的是这个考古学。
And he too had an article in the fundamentals. That was the name of the work, the 12-volume set.
他这个12本的这个关于基要派的事情，他也有贡献，他也有写一篇文章。
And the title of that article was "Recent Testimony of Archaeology of the Scripture."
他写的那个文章呢，据说来证明这个从考古学来证明这个圣经，做一个见证。
Now, if you remember, we talked about briefly Western Theological Seminary.
我们有讲到那个西方的神学院。
This school was considered the Princeton of the West.
这个可以说在那个西方呢是叫做在Princeton 是称为 Princeton 的学校。
The denomination it's involved in is the Presbyterian Church in the USA.
因为他们是在是有那个在美国的这个长老会开始的。
But sadly, Western Seminary, only in 7-year period of time, became liberal.
但是只有7年的时间呢，它就变成是新派的。
Before this happened, though, it had a reputation of being more conservative than Princeton.
它以前是比较是保守派，是好像是说在那个是 Princeton 的这个比较保守派。
Princeton had Western had a faculty of A.A. Hodge, which his name will become more familiar later on in this class.
据说这个 Western 这个西方的神学院呢，它有其中一位很重要的人物，就是 A.A. Hodge。以后我们会研究他的事情。
He gave a defense of Calvinism.
他很为着这个加尔文的那个主义而辩护。
Do you understand what Calvinism is?
你知道那个加尔文的那个思想
I don't think everybody knows.
Okay, Calvinism.
这个讲到加尔文
John Calvin was a reformer.
这个是改革中的这个 reformer 是Calvin
during the Protestant Reformation.
是在这个基督教改革的时间。
And what has become known as Calvinism today,
据现在所说的这个加尔文的主义
perhaps is slightly different than what Calvin himself believed in total.
它就是加尔文所相信的这些的教义。
But if you think of the flower,
你看到那个flower 那个花的时候
not flower you bake a cake with, the flower that you plant in the
是
garden.
那个粉
Think of the flower named tulip.
就是 tulip 这种的
Tulip. Okay, tulip.
这个是 tulip 这种的花。
So Joseph, what do you know about tulip? Tell me about tulip.
T stands for total depravity.
Mm-hmm.
I irresistible. TU. U is universal.
Unlimited.
Unlimited atonement.
L is limited atonement. U is unconditional election.
Unconditional election. And TUL is stands for limited atonement.
Mm-hmm.
TULI irresistible grace.
Mm-hmm.
The last one is perseverance and saints.
That's right, perseverance and saints.
这个是加尔文主义有特别5点，这是第一就是 T 用人类完全堕落，然后第2方面是没有条件的拣选，第3是有限定的赎罪，第4是不可以抵抗的恩召，第5是圣徒蒙保守。
And so Hodge was giving a defense of this theory, Calvinism's theory of primary election.
据说他 Hodge 呢，他就说这个被拣选的事情。
About limited atonement.
讲到有限定的那个赎罪。
And the Presbyterians, most of them are very Calvinistic. Not all of them, most of them are very Calvinistic.
很多那个长老派的人呢，他们相信的就是这个加尔文这个主义。
And some of them have a different view of eschatology.
然后他们也有不同的观点关于这个末世论。
Then Beale brings up a missionary.
Bill 这个作者呢，这本书的作者也讲到另外一个人物。
Who actually came when Hodge left Western.
当那个 Hodge 离开了那个西方的神学院。
I believe Hodge left Western and he went to Princeton.
Hodge 呢，他就离开 Western， 他就到西方神学院，就到 Princeton 的神学院。
You have a former missionary coming back from India to fill the teaching position that Hodge had.
他就说他这个人从那个印度回来他是在那边做宣教士，他就来了这个西方的神学院。
He comes and he teaches there and he fills the chair at Hodge's old position.
他就来做那个主任。
Now, probably not Hodge, Kellogg was an old school Presbyterian.
这个Kellogg 这个人呢，就是是一个比较保守派的是那个古的学校来的长老会。
Remember, we had the old school, new school.
我们有那个旧的学校跟那个新的学校。
He was conservative.
他是很保守派的。
He was premillennial.
他是前千禧年派的。
And he spoke at the prophecy conferences.
他也在那个这个预言的讲座呢，这个会议呢，他也是其中一位讲员。
Those conferences that Moorhead had begun and established.
据说当时候已经很稳定了。
And we have also Tate, another member, Tate Cooper, another member of the faculty.
然后另外一个老师呢，在那个神学院是名叫 Joseph Tate Cooper。
And then also at Western, another popular name is Benjamin Warfield.
另外一个人呢是名叫 Benjamin Warfield。
Benjamin Warfield was a defender of inerrancy.
他是也很主张的很强调的，据说这个是圣经是没有错误的。
He taught New Testament.
他是教那个新约的。
As this is going outside what the book is saying, but he also used the critical text.
他也是用那个钦定本。
Or actually at that time it was actually West Cottonwood text.
他是用，对不起，他是用那个 Westcott 跟Ford。
Which became the critical text.
就变成那个批判的那个经文。
Does everyone know what the critical text is? The West Cottonwood text is?
大家都知道这个希腊文的这个 critical 这个批判的那个经文。
And we have Christie. He also taught it at Western.
这个 Christie 这个人呢，他也是在西方的神学院教书的。
Now Christie, this is where the problem begins.
他就看到这个问题。
When we tolerate something that's not right.
当他容忍那些不对的。
Christie, at best, would be considered a moderate.
那个 Christie 这个人呢，可以是比较属于那个综合的人派。
And he tolerated liberalism.
他就来容许有这些这个新派的神学进来。
And the person that took Christie's place, see, Christie tolerated liberalism.
因为这个 Christie 这个人呢，他是来容忍这些新派的东西。
And then we have the person that came into his place was Snowden, around page 130, and Snowden.
130页讲到这个 James Snowden 这个人。
And what Snowden let come into his classroom was views of biblical textual criticism.
他来那个学校呢，他就在那边有关于这个高等的批判的事情。
So Snowden, he's permitting higher criticism to come into the classroom.
他就把这些高等批判的东西带进来。
Again, as we discussed this yesterday, we have higher criticism, lower criticism.
昨天我们有研究过，就是比较高等的那个批判跟低等的。
Lower criticism is which text is the closest to the original.
那个比较低等的那个批判，据说关于你用的那个经文。
Is it Burgon's traditional text?
就是那个 Burgon 的这个经文。
Or is it Warfield's West Cottonwood text?
或是那个 Warfield 他所用的那个批判的那个经文。
Higher criticism
比较高等的批判
is not about which text is the closest to the original.
不是在争论的是那个用的那个经文是什么。
But it's a question of whether or not it's authentic Word of God.
他在争论的就是说这些圣经是不是上帝的话语，这些的真实性。
And so we have this man, you've got Snowden coming into position at Western, and we have Benjamin Warfield leaving, probably leaving Western, and we have him being replaced by Riddle.
这个 Snowden 在那边，后来也有另外一个 Riddle 进来了，来继续他。
Who welcomes higher criticism into his department.
他就很接纳这些高等的批判。
And then we got two professors left at Western, Jeffers and Wilson,
就2个那个神学院的教授呢 ，Jeffers 跟Wilson 他们就离开了这个西方的神学院，他们关于这个就业的部门的。
But then we have more. This is at the Western Seminary, that's supposed to be the Princeton of the West, but it's becoming polluted with liberalism.
他们就是被这些污染了哈，被这些新派的东西。
And so now we have the Old Testament department becoming corrupted with Lopez, who was to teach the Old Testament.
他这个就业的这个部门的老师们呢，就有这些新派的人进来。Lepes.
Pardon me, his name is Kelso. He graduated from Lepes.
他是 Kelso 这个人呢，就是从 Lepes 的这个大学出来的。
And that's a school. Lepes is a school in Germany.
这个 Lepes 这个学校呢是在德国。
So he was corrupted by the schools and university in Germany.
他就被这个德国的这个高等批判受影响。
And he brought that corruption here to the United States, to Western Seminary.
他就把这样错误的观点带来到美国。
And he and other faculty members that were corrupted.
还有另外一个
corrupted the whole school.
还有这些污人带进来的不对的。
Who in turn corrupted the whole student body.
就影响了整个全体的同学。
And consequently, that student body went out to pastor churches around the country.
他们不是在那边来牧会。
And began to corrupt the entire congregation.
也有这些牧师后来毕业以后，那么就出去就影响了这些的教会。
Now another problem in Western.
在这个西方的神学院的另外一个问题。
John Bowman.
另外一个人名叫 John Bowman.
He taught and he believed that the virgin birth was fabricated.
他相信的就是说，主耶稣借着那个童贞女所生的，这个是自己制造出来的。
Remember what we had on the board yesterday?
昨天我们也有看到那个在黑板上所写的这个基要派的五个重点。
About the fundamentals, 5 fundamentals.
就是这些基要派所相信的这个五个重要点。
That was one of them.
这个就是其中一个。
Now let me go back to what we were saying earlier about the Presbyterians' view of higher education having a higher standard.
我刚才有提到，就是说这个长老会他对这些学生对这些要做牧师的他们教育的程度的要求。
Because they were insistent upon their pastors to be educated at seminaries.
因为这些牧者都要在那个神学院毕业出来。
They were, in a sense, corrupting their own denomination.
他们在这个污染了他的这个败坏了这个他们的宗派。
So, in effect, they were sending their people, their sons, their children, to school.
他们就把他们的小孩带到那个学校去。
To be taught the Bible.
是要学圣经。
To make them equipped for the ministry.
使他们能被装备，知道怎么样来服侍。
And yet, the very seminary or college they were entrusting to teach them.
据说这些神学院、这些学校应该是要训练他们。
Was teaching them heresy.
教他们的是这些的异端。
And so we have all these different schools. Going back to the book now.
所以我们再回来看我们这书本。
We have a Presbyterian Northwest being established.
在那个Northwest 的这个西北边开始的那个神学院。
It's really not the Northwest, it's in the Midwest, I should say.
其实是在中西边。
Hanover, Indiana.
在那个 Indiana 州。
McCormick Seminary.
这个就是 McCormick 的这个神学院。
And so we have McCormick was an inventor.
这个McCormick 这个人呢是一个发明者。
And McCormick was the one that helped finance and build the school.
其实他来支持这个建立这个学校。
And for a time, this was transferred into an old school, Presbyterian school.
他后来就有这个古老的那个学校。
Now McCormick, one of the professors of McCormick.
这个在 McCormick 的这个神学院里面有一位教授。
Had a response to a liberal pastor.
他要对这个一个自由派的这个新派的这个牧师，他要针对他。
David Swing was his name.
他的名字是叫做 David Swing。
And David Swing denied inerrancy.
因为那个 Swing 这个人呢，他否认这个圣经没有错误的。
This is a Presbyterian pastor
这个是一个长老会的牧师，
who is denying inerrancy.
他否认这个圣经是没有错误的。
And so Patton was launching an attack, and rightly so, against the liberalism, the teachings of this pastor at Fourth Presbyterian Church in Chicago.
这个 Peyton 这个人呢，他就攻击他家，就针对他，因为这个 David Swing 呢，他是在 Chicago 的那个长老会在做牧师。
And so eventually, Patton left. This is the reason this was brought up, is to discuss and demonstrate who Patton was.
据说我要告诉你关于这个 Peyton 这个人。
Patton left McCormick and went to Princeton.
他离开了那个 McCormick 的那个神学院，就搬到那个 Princeton 的神学院。
You're probably a half hour, 45 minutes from where I'm at today.
据说差不多是45分钟的。
And we have more people coming to McCormick.
就更多的人来到这个 McCormick 的这个神学院。
And I mean, it wasn't officially called McCormick all the time, but it became McCormick after the donor died in 1866.
其实这个 McCormick 神学院是到他 McCormick 这个人过世以后才来定这个，据说这个学校是取他的名字。
And then we had another seminary that's being established
还有另外一个神学院
in Cincinnati, Ohio.
在 Ohio Cincinnati 的这个地方。
And we have the first president here was Layman Beecher.
这个是 Lane 的神学院，是那个 Beecher 的这个人来做第一位的院长。
And Layman Beecher is the father of Ward Beecher.
这个 Beecher 呢的父亲是 Henry Ward，the father of Henry Ward。他是那个 Henry Ward 的父亲 Beecher。
And also the father of Harriet Beecher Stowe.
也是那个Harriet Beecher Stowe 的这个人的父亲。
And Layman Beecher, we'll find out he wasn't, from the very beginning, this school wasn't a very good school. Layman Beecher wasn't orthodox.
这个Beecher 这个人呢是比较是属于那个正统派。
So Lyman Beecher probably was tried for heresy.
据说他也被攻击，所以他们就来说他是那个走异端的路。
Yes, you had a question?
有
So
审判。
Leland Beecher was not Orthodox.
No, he was not.
他不是很正派。
And Lyman Beecher, his children, neither were his children.
他的孩子们也没有。
These two that were mentioned here, Ward Beecher and Harriet Beecher Stowe.
就是这个Henry Ward Beecher 跟那个 Harriet Beecher Stowe。
Now, does Harriet Beecher Stowe, does anyone know who she might be?
你知道她是哪一位吗？
Harriet is a woman.
It's a woman, yes, it's a woman.
她是一位姐妹。
So she must be the sister of Henry Ward.
She's the sister of Harry Ward, that's correct.
是 Henry 的那个 Beecher 的可能妹妹或是姐姐。
Going back to our history of America,
当然我们看到美国的历史，
the war between the states, or the Civil War is sometimes called,
在这个内战的时间，
when there was a conflict between the North and the South, southern parts of the United States.
北边跟东边的征战。
She wrote a fictional book
她写了一本书，
entitled Uncle Tom's Cabin.
她是写那个 Uncle Tom's Cabin 的这本书，
Yes, which was painting the war in a certain light.
他们就好像他是在描述这个征战，
But the work was fiction,
但是是fiction 不是真实的，
meaning it wasn't true.
这个不是真实的。
Then we have Oberlin College, another Presbyterian school.
还有另外那个长老会也有另外一个学院就是 Oberlin College。
And so we have real leading students out of the college. And we have, of course, we already mentioned the heresy trials of Stowe.
据说 Stowe 呢被审问有这个，因为他们说他是走异端的路。
And then we had, again, like I said earlier, we have the Presbyterians always breaking up and merging and breaking up.
据说长老会都是联合，然后分裂，然后就又联合。
So we had a merger there was a merger that took place, and Lane became liberal.
这个 Lane 呢，就后来跟那个 merge 在一起，也变成新派的。
And so we have Henry Smith of Lane.
据说我们要来对的是 Smith 这个人 Henry Smith
being defrocked, being removed, having his credentials removed from him to be a pastor.
他就被解除他的那个职位。
Someone else, rather being kicked out or tried for heresy, he just left for his liberal views.
他就是因为另外一个人，他就那个 Mark Gifford 呢，他就被强逼要离开这个教会，因为他有那个自由派的思想。
And now, remember talking about McCormick earlier? Today we have McCormick and Lane. Lane merged with McCormick.
1932年的时候，这个 Lane 的神学院跟那个 McCormick 的神学院连在一起。
And so you have a liberal schools merging with each other.
据说都是新派的学校连在一起。
And now today, McCormick is known with the Chicago, what he calls the Chicago cluster, which is a grouping of liberal colleges and universities and schools.
今天呢，这个McCormick 的这个神学院已经是跟 Chicago 的这个大学呢连在一起。
And the problem was at Lane, the Presbyterian Church in the USA could not control union because of its association it had in the past with the Congregationalists.
因为以前这个 Lane 呢，他这个神学院跟那个公理会呢是在一起。
And so we had union coming into the denomination voluntarily in 1870. Yes.
When you say union, you're talking about Union Seminary.
Yes, that's right. Union Seminary. Yeah.
现在是那个协和的那个神学院Union Seminary.
And then the book talks about the Briggs controversy, all these different things that were taking place. But the point that's being made is we have these schools being established because of the value of education, and education is important.
因为这个神学院被设立呢，就是主要就是说提高他们这个这个教育的程度。
But it seemed to become more important than the Word of God itself.
那么他就后来强调的就是胜过说强调圣经的教导。
And so we have at Union Seminary we have two people that were brought into to kind of mediate the conflict.
这个协和的这个神学院呢 ，Union 神学院呢，有其中两个人物。
And that's what those two people were, Smith and Shedd.
就是这个133页讲到这个 Henry Smith 跟这个 William Shedd 的这个人。
And they took an attitude of tolerance.
他就是很容忍别人。
Toward biblical higher criticism.
他就来容忍这个高等的批判。
And now we have a graduate of Union.
有一个从这个神学院毕业出来的
Charles Augustus Briggs, who was embracing modernism.
他这个Briggs 呢，就是布雷格士这个人呢，他就来他是因为从这个神学院毕业出来，他就来接受这个现代派的，很全心全意的来接受这个现代派的。
Now Union Seminary and Princeton Seminary were at odds with each other.
这个协和的神学院跟那个Princeton 的神学院呢，两个都在竞争。
And so they were night and day, complete opposites.
他们是完全不一样的。
Union was the liberals.
那个协和神学院是那个是自由派的新派的。
Princeton was the conservatives.
当时候这个 Princeton 神学院是叫做是那个比较保守派的。
Other schools that are in the Chicago cluster, as you'll see here on the board.
那么这些在 Chicago 的这些其他的学校的名字是写在这个黑板上。
We mentioned McCormick was liberal. Different schools we talked about, but in addition to those schools,
McCormick 神学院是现代派的，还有其他的这个也是比较新派的。
I mean, we have talked about Union, but we have Lutheran School of Theology,
我们有路德会的神学院，
Chicago Theological Seminary,
有 Chicago 的神学院，
United Church of Christ,
这个是那个他的宗派是 United Church of Christ。
Catholic. This is on page. This is the footnote number 14. These schools were
这
listed.
个是134页的那个注脚的那个第14哈，有列出来。
Catholic Theological Seminary,
还有那个天主教的那个神学院，
Meadville Lombard Theological Seminary,
这个 Midville 跟那个 Lombard 的这个神学院，
Unitarian, Bethany Theological Seminary,
还有波德尼的那个神学院，
Northern Baptist Theological Seminary,
还有那个浸信会的北边的那个北浸信会的那个神学院。
and so these are the schools, the seminaries that are all these things that are taking place about the Presbyterian seminaries and fundamentalism. And so we have this dynamic of understanding what's going on in America. We have some schools are conservative, some schools are liberal.
所以你会看到当时候的这些神学院，有一些是很新派的，有一些是比较保守派的，是基要派的。
And you have pastors and preachers from both schools that are fighting with each other.
所以有这些牧者呢，从不同的神学院出来的，那么你会想象到他们会那种的争论。
Any thoughts or questions?
有没有问题？
If not, let's take a short break.